Which martial art should you learn first? Okay, so first let me say that if you're watching this, you should definitely learn a martial art. It will teach you all sorts of things about resilience and pushing through discomfort. It will build your confidence and it will give you more options if you ever need to defend yourself. And if you're only going to learn one martial art, there are probably about 100 videos featuring people arguing about which one is best. And I think the actual answer depends on what kind of person you are, how big you are, how athletic you are, what kind of thing you like doing, and what kind of self-defense situations you're likely to end up in. But I got asked the specific question in my comments recently, which was, which martial art should I learn first? And I think that's a really interesting question, which I have a take on, which I haven't seen much anywhere else. So today we're going to talk about which martial arts are worth learning, but we're also going to talk about the order you should learn them in. And by the end of the video, hopefully I'll have made a strong case for my preferred order, though you are welcome to argue with me in the comments if you like. Just to get this out of the way, I am not an expert in self-defense by any means. I've been practicing martial arts for about 20 years. I'm a brown belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. I've done 4 amateur MMA fights and a bunch of grappling competitions. Studied arts like Kung Fu and Muay Thai abroad. And I've also spent a bunch of time doing stuff like Capoeira, Wing Chun, traditional Jiu-Jitsu, and a bunch of other martial arts which I don't think actually work. Okay, so first, what should you actually learn? I think the super simple answer to this is that you need to learn at least one striking style, one style that emphasizes takedowns and stand-up grappling, and one style that teaches you to fight on the ground. And this probably goes without saying by now, but I am gonna say it. If the style you're training doesn't involve some kind of live sparring, I would be very skeptical about how well it is teaching you to fight. Ultimately, fighting is about making your stuff work on someone who doesn't want it to work on them. So if you're not training against an opponent who's giving you pretty near full resistance at certain points in your training, then you never really know if it works. And to be honest, for self-defense and a lot of the confidence that comes from fighting, you need to feel what it's like to get hurt and keep going. The first time you get punched in the face is horrible and disorienting, and it will make you forget a bunch of stuff. You do not want it to happen in a real fight where the stakes are very high. But also in styles like jiu-jitsu and wrestling, you just get used to being roughed up. You fight against people who aren't politely taking the moves. You get people who like grind their elbows into awkward places or like shove a hand into your face, and you really have to get used to that stuff and still making the moves work. So in terms of stand-up styles, I think boxing is fantastic. It's perhaps the simplest thing you can learn because you only have to worry about hands. It will teach you good head movement. It will teach you to be very good at generating power by getting your hips into the movements you're throwing. And yeah, it will teach you to get hit and keep going. I would say that boxing is maybe slightly less useful if you're smaller or less powerful, but then I do know at least one woman who has dealt with a burglary by punching the burglar in the face. I think Muay Thai is great because it introduces a whole bunch of different weapons that boxing doesn't use, and there's definitely benefits to learning to throw like powerful low kicks, throw elbows over the top, use the Thai clinch and start using knees and stuff like that. Boxing might be preferable as a beginner because it means you've only got one thing to concentrate on rather than spreading yourself quite thin over Muay Thai, but Muay Thai is a fantastic choice. For takedowns, I think it really comes down to what's available in your location and what you most feel like doing. Where I live in the UK, there's a much stronger tradition of judo, and I've done a lot more judo than I have wrestling. Ultimately though, what both judo and wrestling do is teach you to kind of move around a resisting person's weight and ultimately try and throw them on the floor, or not be thrown to the floor yourself. And I actually think that's a hugely underrated skill, if anything. If you're throwing people around on concrete or through windows or into fire hydrants, that is kind of a much more important part of the fight than it is in the UFC, where the worst thing that's going to happen is you get slammed into the canvas quite hard. And then finally, you need to learn to grapple on the ground. Honestly, for most people, this is going to mean Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu or some kind of no-gi submission grappling. But yeah, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is fantastic. I've done it a ton. At some point, maybe you want to play around with strikes in it, but that's something for down the road. If you are good at Jiu-Jitsu, it honestly feels like a superpower. You are so much more capable than 99% of the population at fighting in this one area where most people don't ever think about ending up. And like, you can beat up guys that are 50 kilos heavier than you without actually that much effort. And if you're only going to learn one style, then that basically comes down to what you're going to enjoy practicing the most and therefore train the hardest at, but also what kind of situations you're likely to get in. If you're a woman, you're unfortunately more likely to be the victim of a kind of sort of predatory violence where either someone that you know or someone that you don't kind of stalks you and tries to grab you. If you're a dude, you're more likely to get in the kind of altercations that are kind of chest beating outside a bar, who are you looking at kind of thing. But then it's also worth bearing in mind that those are the kind of situations that you can often just walk or run away from. So you don't have to worry about always being prepared for those situations in the same way that a woman who wants to like be able to occasionally walk home at night needs to think about her own life. And you know, there's enough street fight footage out there on video now that we kind of know what works and what doesn't, and the fact is a lot of different stuff works. There are videos where stuff is resolved by striking, there are videos where stuff is resolved by grappling. There are situations where grappling is not appropriate, there are situations where striking is not appropriate. I've been in 2 violent altercations in the street. Ask me about those in the comments. And honestly, taking the guy down and trying to do some kind of grappling would have been the absolute worst choice possible in those situations. So would hitting the guy, but then again, I have about half a dozen friends who've been in situations that could have turned really nasty that they've resolved using like grappling or jiu-jitsu. What I will say about grappling over striking is that it gives you more options. If you're in a situation where somebody's acting out a bit, but it's not clear that anybody's life is being threatened, then it's much better to have the option of like either taking them down to the ground and controlling them there, choking them out, or like otherwise controlling them in the clinch, than just cracking them in the face and watching them fall over, hit their head, and maybe you end up on a manslaughter charge. So if you're gonna learn one thing, learn the thing you'll show up to. So what order should you learn in? Okay, I'm just gonna say it. Striking, takedowns, grappling. And my reason for that is really simple. Grappling is addictive. If you start grappling before you do anything else, chances are you will never learn anything else. You start grappling, and then anything that would take you away from grappling feels like a waste of time that you could be using to learn to get better at grappling. Because the thing about grappling is, it's like video games. You pick a partner, you slap hands, you try and kill each other for 5 minutes, one of you or the other of you probably taps or like gets the advantage, and it's clear who's like winning or losing. And then you smile at each other and you say, thanks very much, and then you do it all again. So every time you train, you are getting that kind of endorphin, dopamine hit of winning and losing and really trying hard. And that new move you learned getting you out of a situation you couldn't get out of before, or that little trick submission that you picked up, like helping you tap someone out, like unexpectedly. It feels like a video game in that you never get really hurt, but you can go full out and then just reset after every round. But it also feels like a video game in that you are like constantly learning and there's a constant tick of new stuff to do. You will never learn everything there is to do in grappling. I've been doing it for like more than 15 years and there are still submissions that I don't know and new stuff being invented all the time. And you know that every hour you spend doing it is making you better at doing the thing that you have come to really like doing, aka rolling around on the mat and trying to tap each other out. And that is kind of the beauty of jiu-jitsu. You ultimately get addicted to the feeling of sparring in a way that's not a million miles from a real fight. So you get tons and tons and tons of close to real fight experience while you're doing something that's like addictive and fun. The downside of that is then you won't want to do anything else. And that is why you should learn striking first. I'm not saying that striking isn't complicated and tactical and very nuanced. And there are still kind of setups and patterns and counters that I haven't got the vaguest clue about. But the basics of striking are pretty simple. If you go to a boxing class and pick up like a strong jab, good right straight, good left hook, and like ways to work them in with body punches, that will get you quite a long way. Like you can get into like shovel hooks and uppercuts and, you know, overhand setups, all the rest of it. But just getting good at keeping your guard up and mastering a small handful of punches and basic footwork is a pretty solid grounding, and you could get pretty good at that in a pretty short amount of time. And stand-up grappling is kind of similar. Like there's a small handful of takedowns that I consistently use and I'm fairly confident about pulling off against like intermediate people. But the thing is, stand-up grappling is hard. You can't rest like you can on the ground, and anytime you kind of stop putting in almost your maximum level of effort, you are gonna get chucked. So people who do ground grappling first quite often don't like stand-up grappling. Whereas if you do stand-up grappling first, then you go to the ground and you'll be like, oh yeah, turns out the ground is pretty easy. So striking first, takedown second, grappling third. Please do feel free to argue with me in the comments, but I am right though.